Hello and welcome back to this web development course. So in this tutorial, we're going to build our first HTML page. While we do that, some of the topics I'll be discussing are doc types, HTML header, title and body tags, metadata, HTML file extensions, and HTML naming conventions. So here I am in Visual Studio Code. One thing to mention if you are using this is you probably want to turn on scroll zoom. So if you go to File, Preferences and Settings, and you type in mouse wheel zoom, you can turn that on. And that really does make things a lot easier to utilize. You can use the zoom function a lot more effectively. Else, the other zoom option is you press Control and A or minus, and that kind of zooms in, but you can see the whole interface zooms in and out, which isn't ideal. Okay, so let's build our first page. So I'll go to File and New File, and then a new tab appears. I go to File and Save As. And I guess the first thing we need to understand is how to save a file. And you can see we've got an option here of the type of file types we can save files as. We'll be using HTML, so I can select HTML, and I'll rename my file as index. So I'm just going to build a new folder on my desktop in this case called project. And I'm going to put it inside of there. And there we go. Okay, so if you've just installed this program, you can see I've got some breadcrumbs now. I like to get rid of that. So I press View and then deselect Show Breadcrumbs, and that disappears. Just frees up a little bit of space on my screen. So let's start building a web page. So all HTML documents must start with the Doctype Declaration. So down the bottom here, you can see that I've left a note to the HTML specifications. So if you're interested in reading about the standards, the specifications that define HTML, then please have a look at that link. That'll take you to the latest specifications. So like I said, all HTML documents start off with the Doctype Declaration. So what is the Doctype Declaration? What is it for? So the declaration, it isn't a HTML tag or a HTML element. It's just basically information. And that information is for the browser, whether you be Chrome or Explorer or Firefox. And it basically gives information to the browser about what document type it's to expect. So with HTML5, it's really simple. We just type in the angle bracket. And you notice that once I start typing in code, I'm given code snippets of potential things I might want to type. And if I just press enter now, you can see that I didn't have to type anything there apart from the bracket and the exclamation mark, and the rest of it is made for me. So this is one of the benefits of using a code editor. Or like I said in a previous tutorial, that some people prefer typing code. So if you don't want to do that, then you can turn that feature off, or you can maybe use a notepad, for example, if you want to write everything out. So this is the HTML doc type. So this is basically, like I said, a piece of information that's given to the browser and tells it essentially this page is going to have HTML5 HTML. So that's the standard used on this page. Now we're fairly lucky that nowadays the doc type is so simple. We don't have to remember multiple doc types. In older versions of HTML, HTML4 or the XHTML version, we had these much longer doc types, and we had to be very careful about the type of HTML that we included on the page or utilized on the page, because these would define different standards, and these would give messages or it would give the browser instructions on how to deal with your HTML. So it was a lot tricky back in the day using HTML4, the doc types, but like you've seen, the doc type for HTML5 is really simple. It's just Doctype HTML. Okay, so another point worth making here is that much like most of the HTML that we utilize, HTML declaration is not generally case sensitive. So saying that, we could type in all this in lowercase or some of it in higher and lowercase, and everything would be absolutely fine. So this is generally the way that you see it defined in capitals like this, the doc type. But like I said, HTML generally is not case sensitive. So in order to define where HTML is going to be placed, we start our HTML page with the HTML tags. So we have an open and a close tag. This now follows by a head section. So in this head section, open and close head tags, this is where we're going to place metadata, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So last of all, our tags that we're going to need is our body tags. So this is really simple to understand because anything we want to display on the page is going to be between the body tags. The final set of tags which make up this, what is essentially a boilerplate, this is basically the structure of every single HTML page you create, is going to be the title. So this title is going to go into the metadata area, the head section. So if you like, we could say that metadata is essentially data about data. In this case, this is data about our page. So the title is going to be called first page. So this makes up our boilerplate for a HTML page. So I guess the next thing is to view what this looks like actually in the browser. So if I head over to my desktop and then go into the folder project, all I need to do now, because this is saved as a HTML file, your browser automatically picks this file up, and you can see I've got a Chrome icon denoting it's going to be opened in Chrome. And there we have it, our first web page. So what we can do now is inspect the page. So this is a really useful tool for development. So if I right click, this is, like I said, in Google Chrome, I can do two things here. I can view the page source or inspect. So if I view the page source, you can see that what I'm presented is the code that I typed in on the HTML page. Notice that it only renders or only outputs page, because like I said earlier, anything that I want to display on the page has to go between the body tags. So we don't see any of the other tags or first page, because you'll notice that first page, the title, is indicated up here in the tab. So this title tag here, this element, makes up information that the browser extracts from this page and then puts into this tab. So that's a handy development tool. Secondly, we can right click and use the inspect tool. So this is a little bit more complicated. I just wanted to introduce it to you now so you know it's there. But here again, similar to the source, I can view the actual code, but this allows me to make edits. I can actually change information here, for example, and then it will reflect on the page. What I can also do, which we'll have a look at later on, is select different view sizes. So I can see what my web page looks on a mobile device as well as a larger device. So that will come in really handy once we start building responsive web pages. So like I said, we'll have a look at that in more detail in a later tutorial. So if I close that, I'm left back with my web page, and notice that I changed my code in the inspection tool here. I changed the code, but if I press refresh, it doesn't save that information. It just goes back to my default page, which was just page. An attribute that we can add to the HTML tag is the lang attribute. So as it says here, when I hover over, I've got a tooltip helps define the language of the element, or the language in this case, that specifies the language of the element's content. So in short, by defining lang en, it's going to basically describe or tell the browser or potentially the search engine what language is being utilized in this page. And that can be really useful for Google to serve different web pages in different countries. Of course, there's a different code for different countries. If you type in to Google lang attributes or HTML lang attributes, you'll get a list of all the different countries and their codes. And finally, the last piece of information to add to this boilerplate is the character set. So we add a little bit of metadata here in this meta tag, and we add this attribute char set and UTF-8, which is really the standard for email and web pages. So what is this? What does this mean? Well, in order for browsers to translate the information you put on this page, it needs to know how to translate it. So if you like, UTF-8 describes how information on the page should be translated so that you can see it actually in your browser. So for example, if you're using different languages have different character sets. And of course, your page might include different languages and might require Chinese language sets and so on. So you're working with different characters. So in order to be able to translate all that, this helps kind of standardize how the information in your page, the language, the different symbols will be then ultimately rendered in your browser. Okay, so that really is just optional for now, but I wanted to add it because I think it's a good standard, a good practice to utilize that on your page. So we're just about done here, really. We've got now our boilerplate in place. So like I said, basically every time we build a new HTML page, we're basically just going to print this out first. So probably what's a good idea is to save this as, for example, boilerplate. And then you basically just load this code up every time you create a new page. Okay, so naming conventions for HTML. Please always try and utilize lowercase for naming files. Avoid spacing between words. Use the dash to break up names, not the underscore. And then there are some reserved names, so index.html, home, and default. So you can utilize these names or these file names for your pages. But by default, if you were to actually upload a page to a server and run your website online, these are the file names that the server looks for first. So typically your home page that you build will be called index or home or default. So typically we utilize index. So just to reiterate, your first page, so your home page, you're going to call that index.html. So typically the first page you build is the home page. So you call that index.html, and then you carry on utilizing other page names. This type of thing here will become clearer once we install a server later on in the course and start utilizing these names for our files. Okay, so we built our first HTML page. We had a look on the browser and we looked through some of the tools that we had in the browser to view the code, and that can help us debug the code or add to the code to see how things might look if we change a few bits of code. We discussed the doc types. We looked at and we utilized the HTML header, title, and body tags. I gave you a little introduction in metadata. The idea of metadata, we utilized the title tag. That was metadata that's used by the browser to display the name of the page in the tab in the browser. And then also I very briefly mentioned the character set, which is a little bit complicated at this point to understand. And the reality is that the browser will always use UTF-8 anyway, but it's just good practice to include that piece of code in your boilerplate. And then I did mention that the HTML file extension was .html. So all your pages are going to be named .html at this point. And then I've just gone over the naming conventions. So just make sure you use lowercase, no spacing, and use the dash, not the underscore, when breaking up words. Okay, so hopefully I'll see you in the next tutorial.